Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was adopted by Inoichi. Inoichi's decision to adopt the boy was a spur-of-the-moment thing, but he stood by it, and he could not be prouder of both his children, even if they lived to give him gray hair. Or, how a Yamanaka-trained Naruto went and cheerfully dismantled the last shreds of Sasuke's self-image, because conventional therapy obviously wasn't working well enough, and then proved that even the best minds could be entirely dumb when it came to romance. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 28, Miracles. It is good to see you well, father, Shino said tentatively. They were not usually prone to such effusiveness, but in this situation, Shino felt moved to articulate his feelings clearly, as he had learned to do from observing Yoshi-san. His father appeared momentarily taken aback, but upon giving the sentence due consideration accepted its content with a nod. I have lost an entire colony. I have nearly lost my team. I would have, if not for Ami-kun's expertise. Shino lowered his head in respect. S-sensei. Oh. One of Shino's father's former students, subordinates now, since they had all achieved the rank of Chunin, stood in the doorway of the nearest hospital room, appearing unhealthy in the extreme and evidencing several injuries. It seemed inadvisable for her to have left her bed, as she was clearly in danger of losing consciousness. Keiko, said Shino's father, and moved to offer his arm for her to hold on to. Ami-chan is crying again, the kunoichi reported faintly. The nurse is threatening to sedate her. Sparing Shino a nod of acknowledgement, his father, with Keiko-san partially suspended from his elbow, moved inside the room. Before the door was closed, Shino saw the weeping woman. He barely recognized her as his former classmate. Her long hair had been shaved, presumably to allow the medics to treat the burn that stretched from the left side of her face toward the back of her head, over where her ear used to be. Shino had rarely seen a sight worthier of esteem. Here was a kunoichi adept at handling explosives who had deliberately exposed herself to an explosion for the sake of her teammates. Perhaps he should express this appreciation. He frowned. He better ask Yoshi-san how one ought to proceed in such a situation. Naruto bit the inside of his cheek to stifle his giggles. He more or less dragged Shino to the shop and under Sayuri-chan's watch armed him with a cute little bouquet of freesias. They're Ami-chan's favorite. Thank you, said Shino, looking at the bouquet as though it were an arcane seal. Naruto sighed. Look, Shino. You're my friend, so I'm going to give you a bit of advice. He had not been to see Ami because Ino had warned everybody off. Ami was teetering on the edge of depression, and while she needed support, she also needed her space. She's in a bad place right now, and she will misinterpret any gesture that's not absolutely straightforward. Shino's clear-as-day admiration would become pity in her eyes. Naruto tried to guess where Shino was looking through the sunglasses, and approximate holding his gaze. Put it in words. If you can't tell her, write it down. Kamigami down the street sell some fancy stationery. Shino's shoulders hunched. It was the closest to embarrassed that Naruto had ever seen him. And it made Naruto a little happy. Both he and Shino had someone to focus on, and he could blithely lay his childhood crush to rest. Sasuke and Sakura were recalled so Team Kakashi could go back to taking joint missions 2 days earlier than had been planned. Shikamaru noticed the correlation with Team Shibi's recent near-fatal failure. But Team Asuma caught a short break. Shikamaru gradually populated the apartment with things, usually on the basis of what he expected to need that day. A small stash of spare weapons, toiletries, a change of clothes, a frying pan, a go-board. By the time Yoshi had a chance to spend the night again, they ate out of porcelain bowls, and there was a sponge and a dish towel so they could wash the dishes afterwards. I brought cups, Yoshi said, redundantly, as he set them on the floor between them. Because I brought a bottle of sake and we're too adult to be drinking straight out of it. We haven't celebrated yet, huh? Shikamaru raised his cup. He didn't say a toast, everything that occurred to him was either too trite or too melodramatic. The alcohol warmed him up inside. I figured out how I'm going to move Midori-sensei. Yoshi exclaimed, apropos of nothing. Thanks, Shikamaru. Shikamaru was glumped and thoroughly kissed, and happy to move things to the futon. Only then he was abandoned for scrolls and a notebook full of notes and diagrams. At least he had the sake to keep him warm. Such a drag. Ino was not going to let her lazy teammate usurp her brother for the whole day, so she tracked the twosome down to their little love nest. Shockingly, they were both wearing clothes, and Shikamaru looked blue-balled to all hell. It cheered her up, and her mood improved further at Shikamaru's grumbling as she dragged them out. Sadly, they didn't get far. "What's up, Ponytail Brigade?" bellowed Kiba, marching up the street with Akamaru behind him. They looked like someone had forcibly dragged them through a forest. Ino ignored the way her brother and her useless teammate eyed one another's ponytail with clear intent, and welcomed Hinata-chan home the way she deserved to be welcomed, with hugs and kisses. Well, one hug, but Ino made it an extra good one, with a momentary lift-off and petting hands. She kissed around the Aburame-style sunglasses Hinata-chan had taken to wearing on missions, a gift from Shino, who had gently suggested that not letting everyone know at first glance that they had a Hyuga was good strategy. "You're home early," Ino said. Hinata took her turn to kiss Ino's cheeks. "Where's our warm welcome?" complained Kiba. Akamaru concurred, but Ino knew that the Ninkan was smart enough to remember for the rest of his life what would happen to him if he dared nose at Hinata-chan's bottom again. Since he wanted his own puppies one day, he kept a respectful distance. "We've brought news," Hinata whispered. "Kurenai Taishu and Shino-kun are at the tower with the scroll. It seems bad dash." "Wanna hear a joke?" said Kiba, ignored the negative responses he received and plowed on. So, a rock army and a leaf army walk into Orochimaru's abandoned base, and the leaf general says dash. "Surrender or we'll release the plague," guessed Ino. There went her good mood. Yoshi laughed so hard he scared off the birds perching on the roofs around them. Once he caught his breath again, he clapped sulking Kiba's shoulder and walked away with, "I'm off to pack." Kiba stared after him. "Is it just me, or has Bleach Boy gone even weirder lately?" Ino flicked her fingers at him. "It's just you." Admittedly, Shikamaru added, staring after Yoshi like someone had stolen his pet shogi board, "It was a funny joke." "Too bad," said Ino, "that the punchline is sending my brother to war again." "We could volunteer as backup," suggested Shikamaru. The knife slipped out of Chuji's suddenly numb fingers and nearly impaled his foot. "Are you sick, Shika?" he demanded. This was terrible. Was he feverish? Was he delirious? Shikamaru glared at him. "I can use the word volunteer. Not in reference to yourself," Chuji pointed out. The only thing Shikamaru had ever put effort into willingly was the campaign against the reformation of Inoshikacho, and even that basically amounted to him getting tied to a tree and cloud watching all day, instead of sleeping through class. Or, later on, playing shogi with Asuma-sensei and griping about Ino. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. "Look, it's Team Kakashi. Ino will volunteer us anyway." Now Chuji understood. It was not that Shikamaru was actually eager to go, it was just that this way he might spare himself Ino's cruel and unusual persuasive techniques. "I'll finish my bento," he said, retrieving the knife from where it had gotten stuck in the flooring. "Hopefully Mom wouldn't notice the new hole, and we can go." "I have good news and bad news," Kakashi informed his three subordinates, who looked at him askance for being only 20 minutes late. Tragically, bad habits had to be curbed on a day like this. "The good news is that Rock has officially declared war, which means that come over here." He body flickered some 50 yards past the gate. Sakura and Sasuke stood in front of him a moment later. Yoshi appeared behind him, and Kakashi kicked out at him to get him to behave and join his co-conspirators. Now that war is officially declared and we're in the field dash. It's a forest, Taicho, Sakura informed him pedantically. I officially field promote all three of you to Jounin. Congratulations. He waited for their reaction. Yoshi pouted ever so slightly, reached into his pouch, and handed a sealing scroll to Sakura, who secreted the scroll away and extended an upturned palm to Sasuke. Sasuke, with ill grace, paid up in Rio. In hindsight, Kakashi should have expected this. Nevertheless, he was now peeved by having his fun spoiled. The bad news is that Rock has officially declared a war, and all able-bodied Jounin are expected to contribute to Konoha's safety dash. Weren't we doing that anyways? Yoshi inquired, appearing perfectly innocent, but Kakashi knew better. Report to Tsum, she's holding the front line, he ordered, threw the mission scroll in the air and body flickered away on his own, separate, solo assignment. It had been a waste to keep a 4 Jounin team. Kakashi would probably miss them, life was bound to be boring without little monsters to annoy, and be annoyed by, but they would be fine. The front line turned out to be a small campsite built with Doton and guarded by familiar faces. It overlooked the entrance to the abandoned base, formerly one of Orochimaru's lairs, disguised by a genjutsu that had recently degraded enough for the structure to be discovered. The complex probably went deep underground, since the only visible buildings were barracks, which in no way explained the pair of tall chimneys. Hey, Tsum! Called out Anko-san, peeking from behind the mud barrier. The plague is here. Her voice carried over to the opposite side of the field, where the enemy were occupying a similarly fortified camp. Frantic activity started behind their rock wall. Congrats on the promotion, Punchy, Anko-san said with unusual earnestness, but since Naruto had to dodge her playful stab a moment later, he didn't really suspect her of being an imposter. Thanks, Anko-sensei, Sakura replied brightly. Having a quiet day, Tsum-sama? Naruto asked when the woman crawled out of a tent, bleary-eyed. More like a quiet half-hour, she growled and yawned. Shit, couldn't you have taken a few hours longer? I haven't slept in 2 days. Well, we could have, Sakura said, sweet as molasses, we were just a mite concerned that you might be dying. The woman laughed. Yeah, no. We got a hawk, but those guys over there don't know the war's been declared yet. And they don't want to be the ones to start it. So, we're having us a quiet little standoff, where nobody tries to get inside the snake's hole, and nobody else has to keep them out using violence. Sasuke glanced to the enemy camp. If we kill them all now, we can be home for supper. It had the nice effect of making Anko-san laugh with genuine mirth. Sasuke shrugged one shoulder under the incredulous stares of everyone conscious in the camp. Sasuke-kun believes in practicality, Naruto explained with a wide smile. Which is commendable, and makes him a great problem solver in some situations. However, I believe this situation is more my purview, so let's have a sit-rep so I can see what my team can contribute. There was no small amount of glee in the fact that it was indisputably his team now that Kakashi-sensei had ditched them. It had actually been Naruto's team even before Kakashi-sensei had ditched them, but they had made an effort not to rub it in their Taishu's face. Ino was not going to stop giving Shikamaru shit ever. He was ridiculous. At least this time, he did not attempt to run himself into utter exhaustion in some hilariously pointless attempt to rescue Yoshi. Even without sprinting all the way, teams Asuma and Kurenai arrived before any fighting started. And found that it was unlikely that any fighting would even start, because Ino's, suddenly Jounin-ranked, brother had decided that he didn't give a fuck about some idiot diplomat somewhere deciding to have a war. I'm going to go talk to them, Yoshi declared at one point. Are you crazy? Howled Tsum-sama, who was apparently nominally in charge around here. Yamanaka, get back here dash. Yoshi suicidally ignored her and strode off across the field toward the, already panicking, enemy camp. Which just once again proved that politicians were morons. How did Rock mean to fight against Konoha if they were this terrified of a single Konoha shinobi? This was yandere panic all over again. Sasuke, guard, ordered Sakura. She dropped to the ground to sit lotus-style, and started spreading and organizing the contents of several storage seals in front of her. Sasuke-kun shifted to stand watch, so that she could focus on her work and didn't have to worry about a stray projectile coming from the enemy platoon. Ino took the rearguard position. It was unlikely that an attack would come from that direction, but unlikely was very far from impossible, and with Yoshi on a quest to either get himself stupidly killed or miraculously prevent another damn slaughter, it fell to Ino to make up for his absence. "What's that?" inquired Asuma. His cigarette was snatched away from him before he could light it. Shino gave it to Akamaru, who ran off to bury it deep enough that its stink wouldn't irritate the more sensitive noses. "Poisons," Sakura snapped back, too focused on her task to bother with politeness. "Antidotes." Hinata-chan dash. "What?" demanded Kiba. "Yes, Sakura-chan?" Hinata obediently came over. Sakura handed her a single senbon. "A prick for a prick, and we'll have a few hours of silence. Use at your discretion." Hinata smiled sweetly. "Thank you, Sakura-chan. I will." Shockingly, none of the men standing around had any smart comment to add. By the time the sun began to set, Yoshi had talked the rock ninja into pulling down their fortifications, pooling both camps' officially non-existent alcohol stashes, and sending out a mixed rock leaf party to reconnoiter Orochimaru's barracks for available accommodations, because why should they sleep on the ground if there were empty beds just a few hundred yards over? Sasuke tacitly watched it happen, in the equally tacit and exasperated company of Shikamaru and Shino. "My first mission as a jounin," Sasuke remarked as the scouting party set off. "I won't even get to kill anyone." "It's still early?" suggested Shikamaru, dragging himself to his feet so he could join the scouts. Admittedly, even he did not believe what he was saying. "It is Yoshi-san," said Shino, and really, that was about all that could be said about it. "Is this really happening?" asked Kotetsu, looking around himself at the drinking and conversing rock and leaf ninja. There was a couple by the hazel bush that grabbed the chance to have a bit of a nookie. 90% of everyone were tipsy enough for it to screw with their skills. There definitely wasn't going to be a battle tonight. Izumo shrugged. "It's Yamanaka Yoshi. It's what he does, although, granted, I've never seen him do it on such a scale. I don't think even Inoichi-sama would just take this in stride." "His team seems fine," Kotetsu pointed out dubiously. The Uchiha took everything with numb acceptance, and the pink-haired medic placidly chattered with a pair of rock medics, as though this was something she did every day. At least the two team leads, where was Kakashi-san anyway? Seemed absolutely perplexed, although that might have been because Tsum-sama had just finished a second bottle and was still going strong. "Yeah, but have you seen the other kids?" "Freaked out, all of them. Except maybe that Aburame boy, but that was always a toss-up. He might just have been good at not looking like he was freaking out." "Hey, guys," Yamanaka-kun ambled over. He narrowed one eye at them suspiciously, surveyed them from the toes peeking out of their sandals to their hair, and then brightened. "Oh right, you're those gate guys." "Gate guys," Kotetsu repeated desolately. "Nya, waitevs." Yamanaka-kun waved his hand. "You drank?" Izumo and Kotetsu shook their heads in stunned synchronization. The boy nodded, eyes momentarily sharpening. "Good. I need couriers to Konoha and back with this dash." He pulled a scroll out from under his shirt. "Within the next 15 hours. I know it's a hard trip. Can you make it?" "What is a dash?" Izumo elbowed him and nodded. "We can, Yamanaka-kun." "Rank." "I'll be humble and say A," replied the boy. "But don't be surprised if the Hokage sends you back with an S, yeah?" Kotetsu felt his heart thudding somewhere in the vicinity of his knees. What had just happened? Izumo next to him seemed similarly affected, but was a little better at hiding it. He took the scroll, sealed it inside his belt and threw the boy a little salute that didn't come off as mocking, even though it had been initially meant that way. And, what a time to realize that the boy was actually his superior officer. Yeah, don't die, guys, Yamanaka-kun ordered. See you tomorrow. And then he melted into the shadows like a goddamn ANBU. What just happened? Asked Kotetsu after a while, when he didn't seem to be waking up no matter how hard he pinched himself. Izumo sighed. I think it might be politics. Shikamaru strategically snagged for himself what looked to have been the bedroom of someone high up the food chain while they were clearing the barracks, and let his comrades enjoy communal living. He was napping when someone entered. There was a pair of eerie eyes in the blue-gray moonlit darkness, and Shikamaru released the shadows he had instinctively grabbed for before they got a good grip on Yoshi. It was usually harder to find shadows in the dark, but the moon was very bright tonight. Have you negotiated peace yet? He inquired, lifting himself on his elbows. That initial shot of adrenaline had washed away all drowsiness, and he was already wide awake. Yoshi closed the door behind himself and stuck a seal over the seam between door and wall. Just ceasefire and cooperation. This guy doesn't have the authority to negotiate proper armistice. He walked over to join Shikamaru on the narrow bed. He stank of alcohol. How much sake have you had? Demanded Shikamaru. He didn't have a lot of water on him, and going to search for a bathroom was highly inadvisable. Not to mention the fact that this had been Orochimaru's base, so the plumbing itself was probably a trap. It wasn't exactly safe to drink from the tap. Doesn't matter, Yoshi muttered, climbing all over Shikamaru, pushing him down and kissing along his throat. I don't get drunk. Shikamaru had expected the benefits of having walls between the bed and the potential involuntary voyeurs. Really he did. He just also had a myriad of questions he would prefer to get out of the way so he could focus better. Ino had been right, damn it, he didn't know Yoshi half as well as he thought he did. Already his life was more exciting than he had ever wanted it to be, and Yoshi was just getting started. I'm just really full of energy right now, Yoshi informed him, grinning brightly. His hands went for Shikamaru's pants. You just hang on and enjoy the ride. Ino had taken the last watch, so she was there when Anko-san started the fire, and then bullied a couple of mildly hungover Tokuju into cooking breakfast. Akamaru came to beg for scraps, but his puppy eyes used to work a lot better when he actually was a puppy. Ino took pity on him, and gave him a strip of jerky, with the strict warning, if you rat me out, I'll shave your entire left half, and dye the right one bright pink. And I'll make you think you're a cat for a whole day. The Ninken whined piteously. Slowly, roused by the noises of activity and by the rising smells, ninja all over the field began to wake up, some surprised by the positions in which they woke up, and mill around, unable to believe that yes, they had done that yesterday. Ino found herself smiling at the tableau as Sakura and Hinata joined her, and then Chuji blindly stumbled over, led by his unerring food compass. Shino appeared, quiet and ravenous. Then Kiba, practically dragged by Akamaru, who had loyally gone to get him before the good food was gone and he was left with porridge. Finally, once the sun had risen over the mountains on the horizon, the main star of the show arose from his lair. And by his side, Ino nearly shrieked with laughter, waking up the last few sleepers. There is Shikamaru, in all his bow-legged glory. Chuji promptly abandoned the food and went into mother hen mode. Are you okay, Shika? Shikamaru absently patted Chuji's upper arm. I think maybe my hair doesn't hurt. But I don't mind. It's a beautiful day, he turned his face to the sun. Yoshi sniggered and attacked the food, notably gathering enough of it for two. What? Chuji grabbed his best friend by the shoulders. Ino, get Sakura-chan. Shika, do you have a fever? How many fingers am I holding up dash? Nah, he's fine, Ino assured him, not even peeved that Chuji forgot that she was a medic in her own right. Just extremely well fucked. She didn't want to think about her brother being good in the sack, but seeing the incontrovertible proof in front of her forced her to at least acknowledge the fact. Hey, it's Gate guys. exclaimed Yoshi, staring in a different direction and pretending that he hadn't noticed the glorious commotion he had just caused, with some small help from Ino. You've made good time. Do you have dash? The Harrier, one of the Chunin duo, waved a scroll. One S-rank missive from Hokage-sama for you, boss, and please next time send somebody else. He seemed ready to cry. Or fall over. His companion didn't look much better. Yoshi casually seated them by the fire, commented on how good a job they've done. Ino was pretty sure the two guys hadn't noticed they were beaming at the praise, picked up his momentarily displaced bowl, and went to rescue Shikamaru, who had only just noticed that his private relationship was not private anymore. Yoshi gave the bowl to Shikamaru, who sat down, gingerly, and used eating as an excuse not to answer any questions, and now that he had free hands, he unsealed the missive. No, but Nara. Is that? It's got to be a joke. It's not a joke, have you seen him? Ino's right. Obviously. I see. Hinata-chan piped up brightly. So that is why we intimidated Shikamaru-kun. Yeah, cool. Yoshi said happily, although not actually in agreement. He managed to completely ignore the clamor, even as he grinned the gathered audience into silence. Awesome, I've got the go-ahead. Ino briefed Sama when she wakes up. I'll be over with the enemy leader, negotiating. Hopefully Rock Ninja got coffee. I think a bunch of them have thundering headaches right about now. He looked immensely self-satisfied. Disgustingly self-satisfied. Shikamaru watched him go with a deranged little smile. You okay? Ino asked quietly. Choji wiped his cheeks and sniffled a little, feeling 8 years old again. It was like one of his oldest hurts was finally healing, and it hurt a bit, but it was a good hurt. He nodded. Ino kissed his cheek. Choji was stunned. She had not done that ever before. She consented to hugs sometimes, but kisses were for Hinata-chan and sometimes Sakura-chan. She laughed at his expression, and that was a good hurt too. Then she leaned on Choji's shoulder and looked over to where Shika was sitting with a bowl in his lap, too busy watching the rock camp to eat. She huffed. Sakura-chan stopped by and handed Choji an apple with a scary, medicine glower, eat it or else. I feel like Shikamaru is every day walking a very thin line between seeming cool and embarrassing himself horribly over how much he adores Yoshi. Ino laughed. I know, right? And, believe it or not, he's been like this since we were toddlers. When they were little, Shikamaru had hoarded Yoshi. But the thing was, it occurred to Choji that Yoshi had always let himself be hoarded. And when Shikamaru stopped talking to him, Yoshi's heart had been absolutely crushed. That was a long time ago, but looking at them now, Choji couldn't help but think that they hadn't changed much. A week or a month? 2 months? Ago he did not see that Shikamaru was pining for Yoshi, or that Yoshi thought of Shikamaru as anything but a distant friend, and yet they were both so settled together that those feelings must have been there all along. Choji sniffled again, blew his nose, and buffed the apple against his shirt. Ino, how did I never notice that my best friend is totally dumb? The girls, predictably, just laughed. Did you stop being friends with Yoshi because you had a crush on him? Choji demanded, expression thunderous enough to give Shikamaru a pause. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. I had a crush on him since we were 4. So no. But also, yes. The break had come 4 years later. It had been the moment when Shikamaru had, in all seriousness, decided that he was one day going to marry Yoshi. For that he had to let them grow a little apart. And, all right, he might have panicked. A little bit. But he didn't regret it. He had had a taste of life without Yoshi, and now knew to value him all the more. Besides, Yoshi had needed the time to catch up. It had worked out perfectly. Have I unwittingly been your wingman this whole time? Choji inquired, a little stumped. Yes, Shikamaru replied. Thank you, Choji. You're an excellent wingman. You know what I don't understand? How did I not see it? In hindsight it's completely obvious. You didn't notice it because it had never changed, Shikamaru thought. It has always been there, and why examine status quo that closely? You two are perfect together, and belong together, and I'm so happy for you, brother. Choji announced tearfully, and squeezed Shikamaru in one of his special bones-busting hugs. Chapter 29, Peace. You fucking little arsehole. Howled Godame-sama as the victorious army passed through Konoha's gates. She stormed down the street, scattering pedestrians, enveloped in a cloud of rage. She was not quite radiating killing intent, since the Hokage was not supposed to knock out her own civilians, but the effect wasn't so far off. A few of the fainter-hearted passers-by lost consciousness. She's got that the wrong way round, pointed out Hatsukura. Ino snorted. One point of evidence is not enough to form a theory. Unless you want to share more observations? The fucking little arsehole had not even bothered to tell us anything, Hatsukura hissed, crossing her arms over her chest. Sasuke-kun is probably going to impregnate someone in revenge. Well, he won't lack for volunteers, pointed out Hinata-chan. Ladybug is correct, agreed Shino, because he was at heart a subversive bitch. No wonder Yoshi liked him. Do you just not know how to chill? Lamented Kiba, just as Tsunade-sama reached the crossroads and descended upon Yoshi. Yoshi dodged the punch. Apparently the Hokage wasn't that angry, since she must have been going intentionally slowly. Your orders did not say kill all rock ninja you meet, Hokage-sama. And isn't this better? You can talk about better when it's you schmoozing with these arse-backwards diplomatic types all day. I've had more paper cuts in the last 2 days than I had in all my life before. You made your teammates write all your reports for you, didn't you? Yoshi said sagely. That's it. Tsunade-sama grabbed Yoshi by his vest and shook him so hard his teeth rattled. I'm making you sort this out. Go. I'll make a detour to replenish the Panacea stores, and when I get back to my office you better be neck-deep in my paperwork, boy. Opined Ino. He's not been a jounin for a week and already gets a promotion to Hokage's assistant? Cried Kiba. There is no justice in the world. What they don't understand, Ami spoke after half an hour of sitting there mutely and letting Ino chatter at her about flowers and fashion. She didn't finish the sentence. Ino let her think and critically looked over the 2-page spread on Fujike's Yuki in her magazine. That one dress did not flatter her figure at all. They keep thanking me and telling me how brave I was, Ami rasped, but they're wrong. I think you were plenty brave, Ino pointed out airily, eyes still glued to the glossy pages. Ami coughed. There was no noble decision to sacrifice myself for the team. It was just reflex. Ino hummed and turned the page. You do realize that everybody saved, like the Yondaime, whoever saved their teammates did it on reflex. That's the point of training the way we do. That's why we're allowed to keep team formations even after we're promoted, because you don't get those reflexes easily. Oh. Ino shrugged and finally looked up. Maybe you weren't brave in that moment. Maybe you were just reacting. But then that says even more about you, and frankly, what part of what you did is less admirable than, say, the Nidaime sacrificing himself to let his team get away? Ami's jaw fell. She tried to protest, and almost choked on her words. Ino sharply closed the magazine, and let it flop onto Keiko's recently vacated bed. Listen, the point isn't whether you were brave then. The point is, are you going to be brave now? And I don't even have to ask, because I know you, and I know you're going to walk out of this room, and let your team help you train back up to where you were, and next time you're sent out on a mission you're going to blow a motherfucker sky high. So. She spread her arms and shrugged, like that was all a huge non-issue. Inside her head she crossed her fingers. Ami stared at her for a while, and then laughed, subdued but on her way back up. Are you licensed, Ino-chan? Ino shrugged again. Tomorrow this time I can be. But so could Yoshi. Are you sure? Yes, replied Ami. They saved her eye, and now both of those eyes, dark and shadowed, bore into Ino. We've been friends since we were 6. If someone's going to shrink my head, I want it to be you. Inoichi? Inquired Chuza. He said something about a training session with a nephew of his, replied Shikaku. For a moment he regretted being Inoichi's designated messenger, but if that was the price to pay for being able to damn near read one another's mind, he would deal. Likely story, grumbled Mayu, ladling rich, strong-smelling stew into their bowls. He disappears right when Yoshi-kun becomes the talk of the village. Speaking of. There was a moment of silence, eventually interrupted by Chuza raising his favorite pair of chopsticks and bidding them to enjoy their meal. Shikaka seized upon the excuse to postpone talking a bit more and dove into his bowl. The food was delicious, as it always was at the Akimichi house. Did Shikamaru-kun say anything about? Mayu left the question unfinished, but apparently Yoshino understood what she meant. I haven't seen him since. Which reminds me that I'm going to skin him when I get my hands on him, but Yoshino carted her fingers through her loose hair and looked at Mayu from behind the curtain of it. Shikamaru once broke a tiny little heart. But tiny little hearts are resilient. A lot more resilient than older hearts. And I don't need to know if he underestimated the strength of Yoshi's attachment, or if it was a test. I know that either way Shikamaru is extremely lucky. She leaned into Shikaka's side. Shikako flattered himself that Yoshino felt lucky to have captured him. He hoped it was that, he hoped she would never have a reason to feel differently. Chuza slurped down the rest of the gravy in his bowl and frowned at them. Am I the only one who's really worried that Shikamaru-kun thought that way when he was 8? To be honest, Shikako replied, Yoshino and I were a lot more worried about the fact that our 8-year-old fell in love with all the trappings of it and none of the usual opportunities. After we figured out what the problem was, of course. His son, so small and fragile, already living with that particular noose around his neck, with that unceasing fear of losing his reason to live, should anything happen to Yamanaka Yoshi, and the bitter knowledge that if something did happen to Yoshi, Shikamaru would not have been able to do shit about it. No wonder the boy had fought the team assignments with such destructive single-mindedness. Shikaka did remember what sort of an unstable mess Uchiha Sasuke used to be. Everybody had been worried about Team 7. Shikamaru must have been going out of his mind at least as much as Inoichi, and Inoichi had spent half of his time off drinking with Yoshino. Mayu's jaw sank. You mean, you knew? Oh, Yoshino shrugged one shoulder. You didn't? Chuza took a deep breath. Dear, Mayu admonished quietly. She eyed Yoshino. I do remember how much pain there was in the beginning. How much sadness. She blinked repeatedly to do away with the tears welling in her eyes. Oh, but look at them now. And I do understand, if we saved them from that sadness then, would they be nearly as happy now? They turned to Shikaku, but for once he had no answers for them. Perhaps the boys would have lost that spark, just like Inoichi had stopped hanging on to Shikaku's every word and started offering constructive input instead some time before they graduated from the academy. Perhaps they would have rushed it at 14, 13, even? And messed it up. Perhaps they would have devised a working plan for changing the team assignments together, and died in the wars. Shikaku was discomfited by how callously his son had acted, but at the same time he thanked the gods for Shikamaru's decision. In hindsight, it was a well-chosen path to travel. The truth is, Mayu said like she was reading his mind, we don't know. We can't know. We can, however, be happy for them. Shikamaru did not even see Yoshi for a week after their return to Konoha, so when Yoshi finally came home, to the apartment, which was now apparently home, Shikamaru jumped him. Literally. Shikamaru leapt out of the futon, scattering ghost stones, grabbed onto Yoshi and dragged him down for mutual ravishing. Ow, careful there. Yoshi hissed. You've got sharp claws, dear heart, and parts of me are really sensitive dash. Next time the Hokage tries to steal you, just take over the office, Shikamaru insisted, trying to pull off Yoshi's mesh shirt. Jounin uniforms were not designed to be easy to take off, and he had no hands-on experience with removing them yet. He hoped that he would manage to put off his own promotion for a while yet. Then we could have sex on the desk dash. Is this a power kink? Demanded Yoshi, pulling the mesh over his head. I loved you before you were powerful. Shikamaru protested, and then was shut up by the addition of a second tongue into his mouth. Kurama half-opened one eye, took stock of what was happening, and wished he could brain himself hard enough to lose consciousness to put himself out of his misery. Sadly, the grass was soft, and even if it weren't, he was a chakra construct. He pulled his tails tight around his head and cursed at the top of his voice to drown out the sound. That was what he got for demanding access to his host's senses. Couldn't they just rut like the mammals they were? Was the mushiness necessary? Why Sage? Why him? They shared a shower in the morning, another novel experience, and Shikamaru felt himself getting wound impossibly tighter around Yoshi's finger. He wished he could mind. But he couldn't. Oh, heaven is a place on earth, went his body, and his poor mind had no choice but to fall in line. He followed Yoshi without even asking where they were going, not quite blindly, but faithfully, and that was a pretty good metaphor. The whole of Konoha 12 met at Training Ground 19. Sakura and Sasuke were already in the process of destroying it. They would probably call it a spar, but then, they were borderline S-class shinobi, and Yoshi jumped into the fray without so much as bye. Again? Ino laughed at him. Shikamaru shrugged. He was at the same time more exhausted and more refreshed than he usually would be. Sex with Yoshi was more intensive than most of his training, and there had been a lot of it. A lot. It's like he's catching up on all the years he's missed, Ino mocked. Because Ino had been enjoying other people's genitals since she was a bit too young for it, probably, but she was also clever enough about it that she had a reputation as a satisfying and high-maintenance date rather than an easy one. You look like you're on drugs, Choji said. Eat. He pushed a carton of spring rolls into Shikamaru's hands. Shikamaru ate, wondering when he had incubated a tapeworm. There was no other explanation for this sudden onset of hunger. He had had such plans, such noble plans. He was going to go as slowly as Yoshi wanted to, letting him set the pace, discovering all these new things with him. It hadn't occurred to him that Yoshi just needed to take the seal off his sexuality to turn into a sex god. After minimal practice, Shikamaru was fucked. Both figuratively and literally. And Yoshi, well, Yoshi was not at all interested in being noble. Not in bed. Or in the shower. Or really, probably in a glade while the deer were watching, which was a thought Shikamaru could not afford to ever verbalize, and that reminded him that letting Yoshi into his head again also wouldn't have been safe. He drew the line at being judged by his clan's herd. It was as though Yoshi had decided to accept Shikamaru's, not actually offered, proposal, and inferred that he now owned Shikamaru and could do with and to him whatever he wanted. How did I fall for that innocent facade? He moaned. There was nothing soft, nothing fragile about Yoshi. He was all light and power and energy. He was the will of fire personified, but somehow still managed to paint himself in pastel colors. Ino laughed at him, loud and mean. No idea. Blinded by infatuation? It's not like he even really tries that hard to sell that persona. He's always been a monster. Shikamaru had almost taken that personally before he realized that Ino didn't mean it like that. That Ino didn't, it seemed, even know about the bijou. Ino suspiciously narrowed her eyes. Are you getting cold feet? Maybe? Shikamaru couldn't deny that he was intimidated. It was going to be terribly troublesome. He had outsmarted himself, but he was not going to change his mind. He had been considering Yoshi an integral part of his life for so long that it was far easier to integrate these new facets of his lover's personality into his worldview than even contemplate the notion of living without him. Yoshi was about as axiomatic as gravity. Well, whatever, Ino said loftily, reading his answer from his face. Don't say I didn't warn you, Lazarus. Your warnings came years too late. And Shikamaru was fairly certain that Yoshi would calm down somewhat. With time. One day. It was all still so very new and exciting, and they were both swimming in hormones up to their eyeballs, and he wasn't even actually complaining, just effort. Pain in the arse. Shikamaru grinned. You're looking deranged again, Ino informed him, and turned away in disgust. Teams Kurenai and Shibi, with Haraguchi and Yashitami still looking half-dead, joined them in watching the spectacle that was the newly established team Yoshi's training. None of the Konoha 12 were slouches, but Ino was probably the only one who did not feel as they tried in vain to figure out what was happening on the field and between the speed, the clones and the genjutsu, and even that was because Ino was incapable of feeling awe. Shikamaru thought they were switching alliances, different 2-on-1 every time, but could not tell how they signaled a switch. The plague went at it for more than 30 minutes, before the person sitting behind Shikamaru's back whistled sharply, and Shikamaru realized there were only Yoshi's shadow clones on the field, and they were all popping in a sequence of percussive sounds, while the real Yoshi had come over here at some point, without Shikamaru noticing. Man, I'm glad you're on our side, professed Kiba. Seconded, said several voices. Thirded, Aburame added quietly. Quite a few of his Kakachu were already roaming Yoshi's exposed skin and searching for ways under his clothes, and Shikamaru was going to murder Aburame one day soon. Yoshi was barely out of breath, at least Sasuke and Sakura looked a step from keeling over, that was somewhat reassuring. He snagged Shikamaru around the hips and pulled him over to sit on Yoshi's thigh. Shikamaru reoriented himself and realized that this had distinct possibilities that he had completely overlooked. Safe in Yoshi's strong, warm grip, Shikamaru swatted, gently, because he did not want to start a feud, a few bugs off of a nice, handy shoulder, laid his head on it, and for all intents and purposes went to sleep. Are you two dating? Asked Keiko, who had not been there for the dramatic reveal, and spent the subsequent gossip explosion at the hospital. Nah, Yoshi replied, and laughed. Shikamaru froze. We're engaged, Yoshi added, and raised his hand to show off his ring. Shikamaru reminded himself how much he loved this man, because if he forgot for even a second there was a good chance he would strangle him with a shadow for putting Shikamaru through this much emotional upheaval. He wasn't built for this. He hoped the pesky consciousness would just go away and he could sleep for real, but that was unlikely while he was the center of attention. His instincts wouldn't let him. He pretended, setting all his dead weight on his, apparently, fiancé in retaliation for the scare. So, Keiko spoke after a giggly, whispered conversation with the other girls. Somehow, Yoshi-kun turned the fourth most self-contained person I know into a mushy pile of thoughtless public display of affection. It's the oxytocin, Ino explained dryly. Half the time you see him, Shikamaru's still high. Right. I said he looks like he's on drugs, agreed Choji, the traitor. But he deserved to get in a few good digs after all that Shikamaru had put him through. Chemically speaking, he is, Sakura concurred, still sounding a little out of breath. HN informed them Sasuke. Why isn't Yoshi-kun like this? Inquired Ami. Her voice had changed a little, although Shikamaru probably only noticed it because he wasn't looking and therefore focused on auditory input. The fire damage must have been extensive. She wore a bandana too. Or is that why he's fine being Kakachu food? Yoshi-san has experienced no discomfort from my colony's feeding in years, said Aburame, oddly defensive. He claims to have become accustomed to their presence. Yeah, no, Ami-chan, Kakachu don't bother me at all, Yoshi said happily, inciting Shikamaru to murder. They're a part of Shino, so it's easy to like them. No, really, Shikamaru would make it look like an accident. Jealousy was too troublesome, he would solve his problem once and for all. I know what you mean. Ami said uncertainly. Brother's not acting stoned because he's got insane metabolism, supplied Ino, heading off the impending blow-up. She was underselling it a little, if it was true that Yoshi could not even get drunk. It might have been some strange blood limit, neither Ino nor anyone else in the Yamanaka clan had anything similar, so it was not a technique, but Shikamaru would have bet that they were seeing one of the side effects of sealing a bijou into a person. "You okay, mate?" asked Kiba. "I think," Hinata replied in Aburame's stead, not even hiding her amusement, that Shino-kun just realized how narrowly he avoided the fate of public humiliation. Shikamaru's hand tightened on Yoshi's shoulder. He tried to convince himself that he had no reason to act aggressively possessive. He could just catalog all the aches in his body to remind himself of that. And good thing that Yoshi had so much hair, so that people couldn't see Shikamaru gritting his teeth when he was supposedly napping. "Guys, Shino's definitely interested in so dash. I shall express my gratefulness to Shikamaru-san for saving me from this fate." Aburame cut off whatever morsel Yoshi had been about to share, thus proving that it would have been interesting. "Why?" "Because dash. Yoshi was about to wear you down." If Shikamaru hadn't stepped in, the dashier Ino presumably pointed at the floppy man pretending to be conked out on her brother's shoulder. "Would have been you." There was a moment of silence. "Oh," Shikamaru thought. Ino was wrong. Very well, Aburame was allowed to live. "You look disappointed," suggested Keiko. Ino replied resignedly, "I knew Shikamaru was into Yoshi since we were kids. Had a lot of time to get used to the idea." "Is that why you were so pissed about Shika cold-shouldering him?" asked Shuji. "He was playing games with my brother," Ino announced, in the tone of the prosecutor listing the defendant's crimes. Because, apparently, the only one allowed to play games with Ino's brother was Ino. She had not changed all that much since they were 4, had she? "The way you two play games with everyone?" inquired Fuyumi. "Oh, snap. Someone should offer Ino some ice for that burn." Ino said, coldly enough to treat the burn with it, as opposed to most, actually know what we're doing. "I thought he would fuck it up." He did fuck it up a few times. And when he improbably got yet another chance, because Yoshi is a soft dash. Several people in the circle snorted at this blatant lie. "I thought he'd be too lazy to make a move until it was way too late. He needed so much help, oh sweet Izanagi, don't get me started." Ino made a melodramatic disgusted noise. "But I've had time to come to terms with it, because the writing's been on the wall since he got the stud." "Oh my god, how did I miss that?" cried Keiko. "No idea." Although Ino did make it clear that she was unsurprised by yet another proof of her own superiority to everybody else. That was a plain public declaration of intent. And still everyone except Ino missed it, Shikamaru muttered into Yoshi's neck. "I know." Ino heaved a heavy and fake sigh. "I mean, some days it's like the people in Konoha are not trained ninja. Remember that time Choji said he was never going to marry because girls were annoying dash." To be fair, that generalization was based mostly on Choji's experience with Ino. And Shikamaru told him he'd change his mind when he met the right person, all-knowing? "Wait," Sakura snarled, "I think I remember that. Wasn't that at the academy?" Ino cackled. "Yes. That's exactly my point." "Thank you, Sakura-chan." Shikamaru groaned. "Why are you subjecting us to this?" "So they'll get it out of their system and don't keep pestering us later, dear heart," Yoshi replied sweetly. Shikamaru sat up to glare at him. Sakura doubled over, laughing. Even Sasuke snickered into his collar. And promptly closed his eyes in defeat. "Condolences on your commitment, Naruto-kun," concluded Hataki-san, who got here God's knew when or how, and must have come by specifically to add another layer of humiliation to this. "You could just admit that you missed them," Irika pointed out with far too much logic for so late in the day. Kakashi, who wasn't interested in being judged for his stalking habits again, gulped down a mouthful of his soup. "Too much risk of the Hokage saddling me with replacements." He suppressed a shudder. He had managed not to get his students killed, but it had been a close shave a few times, and their survival was definitely down to their own exceptionality rather than his presence. Without Yoshi, both Sakura and Sasuke would have died half a dozen times over the years. And vice versa. Irika gently blew on his spoon before he put it into his mouth. It was such a pointless gesture. The soup wasn't that hot anymore. He just did it by rote. Kakashi had since resigned himself to being forever amused by this man. Are you? Irika fell silent as he realized that he hadn't thought his inquiry through, despite the length of the preceding silence. But for all his innate politeness, Irika did not actually have a timid bone in his body, so after a bracing moment he asked, "Are you going back into ANBU?" Kakashi had not actually thought that far. On one hand, what else would he do? On the other, he was not exactly eager to return to that time. It had not been a good time. That might have been because it was Irika-less time, or because most of it he had spent convinced that Minato-sensei's son was either dead or being brainwashed, but whatever the case it held little attraction now. I see, Irika said dryly, raising one eyebrow, like he was questioning Kakashi's otherwise infamous mental acuity. Quite, Kakashi agreed. Irika nodded sagely. Indubitably. As they say, Kakashi countered. So it goes. They ate, both trying to not laugh and choke. Or spray vegetable soup over their kitchen table. Probably not, Kakashi admitted after a while. Tsunade was eyeing him as a chair warmer for Yoshi, despite his quiet campaign for skipping the charade and just putting Yoshi in the big chair straight away, and while Kakashi would prefer not to have to do it, it was as good an argument as any to not get sucked back into Black Ops. Irika watched him like he was trying to read between his lines. They were good lines, but symptomatically empty of meaning. Then he shrugged and turned his attention back to his bowl. Just tell me when you make a decision. Actually, Kakashi was going to ask for Irika's input before he made a definitive decision. But he didn't know how to put that into words without sounding soppy, so he just nodded. Thank you, Niji said after Ino decided to end the lesson for that day. You're picking this up unfairly fast, Ino complained, but smiled at the same time to reassure him that she wasn't doubting his worth or only valuing him for his skills, which was the cocktail of mistreatment and misperception that had initially messed him up so badly. Niji was a minefield of issues, and his self-image might as well have been made from spun sugar, it was so fragile. Niji nodded, and accepted Ino's gestured invitation to accompany her inside to the kitchen for post-training snacks. It is fortunate, otherwise, our team ran the risk of being disbanded. One of the side effects of Tsunade-sama's decree that every team had to have a medic was that a lot of people had to become medics very fast. Between Gai-san, Lee and Tenten, Niji really did not have a choice about picking up a brand new skill set. The fact that he had come to Ino and asked for tutoring on his own accord, well, that was her little coup. While Yoshi had been off fighting a war, she had managed to get as far as to have Niji publicly acknowledge that they were friends. It also had the pleasing side effect of making both Hinata-chan and Ino's dad happy. Much to Ino's surprise, being friends with the fatalistic Hyuga wasn't a hardship. They had things in common. For example, Niji was really good at mixing drinks. And he always cheered up Yoshinobu-san. Ino suspected that Ba-san saw in Niji what her son could have been if he were less of a lazy dick. That would be a pity, Ino said honestly. You're a great team dash. We seem to lag behind, Niji protested. Shinobi younger than us are already jounin, whereas we dash. Yeah, because they got field promoted when they headed off to fight a fucking war, Ino cut him off. She did not envy Yoshi his rank, it was well deserved. She just hated that he was in every fucking bingo book by now. She sighed and pulled 2 puddings out of the fridge. Yoshi is a born leader, and he will be a great one. I'd rather focus on supporting him as he needs than try to keep up with him. Niji accepted the spoon and dug into the dessert. After a while of contemplation, he asked, is that why you cultivated his closeness with Nara-san, despite your reservations? Damn geniuses. Ino sighed, but in this instance she had nothing to hide, so she answered truthfully. No. I wouldn't do that. I don't like Shikamaru, that's true, but I could see right from the start that after a little cognitive therapy Niji smirked, part sympathy and part schadenfreude. He could make my brother happy. So, that was my dastardly motive. Your selflessness is admirable, Niji told her, and returned his attention to his pudding. Ino turned to hers, not sure what to do with the compliment. She didn't think she had ever heard Niji compliment anyone on anything, so this was a milestone. But selflessness was not exactly a trait she was interested in honing, and she was not particularly proud of it. I understand your dastardly motive, Niji assured her. I find that I too would be moved to act in yours and your brother's interests. Ino met his eye, which was not really a disconcerting experience after her long friendship with Hinata-chan. Yes, he was implying what she thought he was implying. The Hyuga would stand with the Yamanaka in the years to come. I met your mom in the kitchen today, Shikako mentioned, having come across his son napping on a roof of an apartment complex. Shikamaru shifted a blade of grass from one corner of his mouth to the other and, without opening his eyes, replied, You meet Mom in the kitchen every day, Pops. It's one of her favorite places. I think she channels most of her violent impulses into cooking. Shikako had noticed. He was also very glad that he had not married a poison specialist. She's angrier than usual. Ha! The interrogative sound was spot on, but the smirk betrayed that his contrary and inapprehensible son knew exactly what he had done and left Shikako to deal with the consequences alone. It seems that at some point her son disappeared from the compound and didn't bother telling her that he was moving out. And left behind a mess. What a jerk, Shikamaru agreed, deadpan. Shikako smothered a snort. It was only funny if he didn't have to deal with Yoshino's absolutely fair volcanic rage. I know you're all giddy with the first flush of romance, son, but don't be an arsehole to your mother, okay? First flush of romance? Shikamaru repeated. He half opened one eye. Pops, you're so late even Hataki-san arrived before you. That's what we get for being lazy, Shikako countered, taking no shit. You couldn't even be bothered to pull his pigtails. Easier to daydream, I guess. And wake from nightly nightmares. And beat up training posts. Resource management, his son corrected him, seriously enough that Shikako accepted the explanation rather than counter with another witticism. Strike before the iron is hot enough and you'll break it. Timing is crucial. Shikako would argue that the metaphor was completely off base, but the fact remained that Shikamaru had accomplished his goals with minimum teenage angst and barely any casualties along the way, and Mayu had a point when she suggested that the end justified the means in this case. Talk to your mother, Shikako said uncompromisingly. She spent 14 hours in labor with you and, believe me, that was a bigger pain in the arse than anything she might ever ask of you. Chapter 30, The Legacy. Naruto got used to the living with Shikamaru part quickly, and with only a few small snags. The harder part by far was getting used to not living in the Yamanaka compound anymore. In his heart he still felt like this was temporary, and he would move back one day. Only chances were that Shikamaru felt the same about the Nara compound. And the stumbling block of it was that Naruto knew he could manipulate Shikamaru into giving him anything he wanted once the time to decide would come, but he also knew that he would feel shitty about it. Never mind though. That was a problem for future Naruto. Present Naruto was having a day off missions, and spending it at the shop like the actual flower shop assistant that he still officially was. It was almost time to open, in fact. Give me the dirt? Inquired Ino, sauntering in with a fresh load of carnations. Naruto answered the question she meant to ask rather than the one she asked. It's really good. I like almost everything, and a motivated Shikamaru is a force to reckon with. He meant it about the relationship as a whole, rather than just the carnal part of it, and Ino understood. She leaned against the counter by his side and surveyed the room full of smells and colors. I still think you are making a mistake. With Shikamaru? With giving up on all other options before you tried anything else. What about Shino? I like Shino. I'm just glad to see him trying to court a kick-arse girl, Shino and Ami would be so good together. Besides, Naruto wasn't sure how to explain that if he had ever dated Shino, it would have been as Yoshi rather than Naruto, and this was better. He and his sister were cut from a different cloth, for all that they were stitched together damn near the same. I'm not made like that, Ino, and you know it. I'll flirt and fake date for the fun of it, but a real relationship? I don't need more than one. And you're going to marry the first person who asks you out? Ino spread her hands as if to suggest the magnitude of the folly he was committing. Shikamaru is hardly the first person to ask me out. But look, Naruto grinned. Concept. The most brilliant man we know would do damn near anything for me. You'd have to stop fucking him for 3 seconds so his brain comes back online, Ino deadpanned. You were right, Naruto admitted, and that finally made her relent. The power I've got over him, it's so heady. Falling in love was just a matter of time, and it wasn't even a long time. I scheduled it for the Saturday before last. He shrugged and grinned unrepentantly. It's too late now. She slumped in defeat. You've cared for Shikamaru since we were tiny. That never went away. Even when he was being a dick. Otherwise, his being a dick wouldn't have bothered you. If it had been anybody but him, you would have just turned on your mojo and twisted him around your finger again. It only took you a few hours to convert a group of enemy shinobi with your creepy unorthodox technique. She stabbed him in the chest with a blue-nailed finger. What will you do if he does it again? Naruto rubbed at his pectoral. He'd have a bruise. For, 10 seconds. Thanks, Demon-san. If he does what? If he walks away from me, or if he uses me in one of his plans without telling me. Okay, I admit he didn't actually walk away from you, and I can almost see his logic there, and it's hard to argue against his results, but dash. We know him, Ino, Naruto implored, and we have the best training. If he tries manipulating either of us, we'll make him in seconds. Don't let him get away with it. Ino ordered through clenched teeth. She really didn't like Shikamaru. Naruto was amazed at how far she had gone to help them despite that antipathy, and concluded that Ino knew exactly what he was like and what would make him happy, and was willing to inconvenience herself with a brother-in-law whom she scorned for the sake of her brother's happiness. She was the best sister. And if she one day brought home an insane S-class nuke and declared she was going to marry him, Naruto would be firmly on her side, unless it was Madara, but Ino had better taste than that. I won't, he promised. If Shikamaru wants to share a life, he'll share all the plots too. So, she moved over to the flowers and started picking roses for a bouquet. You're finally going to start campaigning for the Hokageship? Naruto came back from work in a good mood, a whole day with plants. And spied Shikamaru lying on the sofa. They had a sofa now. And also a silent agreement that no one would ever be exiled there. With his arm over his face, he took off his sandals and... Not now, Shikamaru grumbled. I've got a headache. Naruto stopped and thought about this. Are you cliché-ing me? No, Shikamaru moved his arm a little until one eye squinted out of its shadow. I've got an actual headache. If I just wasn't in the mood, I'd tell you so. Good. But also not good because now Naruto was worried. Is it like a migraine? Do you want me to turn off the light? Then he noticed the state of the apartment, and it occurred to him that barely anything had changed since he left in the morning. When did you last drink anything? Because if you are dehydrated because you were too lazy to get off your arse and grab a glass of water, you absolutely deserve it. Shikamaru groaned and rolled over so that he was facing the backrest. Naruto decided that it didn't count as exiling if he just left him there, but he also wanted Shikamaru to be functional sometime in a not-too-distant future, so he filled 2 field flasks from the tap, left one at the foot of the sofa and pushed the other between Shikamaru and the backrest, where he wouldn't even have to reach out for it. Then he went to the bedroom and took the opportunity to carve a new seal into the flooring. Naruto was woken in the middle of the night by Shikamaru crawling into the futon with him. He didn't feel like opening his eyes, but he didn't have to, just grabbed the intruder, pulled him closer, and rubbed his cheek against the nearest patch of skin. Pekka Pico. Shikamaru made a sound of intense emotional pain. Why did you have to make that into something lascivious? The only people who ever used that nickname were toddler Choji and my mother. Naruto just kissed him, because he didn't think your low-grade trauma pleases me was a good thing to say to his significant other. Especially with the inherent shades of Ino in such a notion. He preferred Ino as much out of his bedroom as it was possible to keep her. Also, it was too early, so he muttered night and went back to sleep. You're here again? Demanded Ino when Yoshi walked into their parents' house for the second day in a row. Don't you ever take missions anymore? I won 2 wars, Yoshi pointed out, entered the kitchen, and discovered that Ino wasn't alone. Hi, Hinata-chan. Did you girls have a sleepover? He waggled his eyebrows, conspiratorially, because at a second look his backpack turned out to be a sleeping Shikamaru getting a piggyback ride. Hinata-chan blushed, but she didn't cringe or avert her eyes or try to hide under the table, so Ino pressed a kiss to her cheek and explained to her brother, they're tearing down and rebuilding part of Hayashi-sama's house, so Hinata-chan is staying with me for a while. The alternative had been the guest room of one of her aunts, and that was sufficient motivation for Hinata to stand up for herself against her father. Yoshi mimicked one of Shikamaru's meditation poses, and then said, in an intentionally fake tone, it wouldn't happen to have anything to do with unkillable mold, would it? Hinata-chan looked stunned for a moment, and then giggled so hard she nearly asphyxiated. Go sit, Hinata-chan. Ino and I've got this down to an art. We used to make our own bento when we still went to the academy. They liked cooking together. It was a little nostalgic for them, it was the first activity they did together that required actual cooperation, and they probably became as close as they were thanks to it. Ino suspected that Yoshi had cultivated Teen Plague's closeness by similar means. Shikamaru seemed to wake up somewhat, as if something had caught his attention, something other than what was in Yoshi's pants, even. Yoshi tapped his thigh to get him to dismount and, once unburdened, sighed melodramatically. I can't believe I missed the fallout of the mold prank. Too busy doing your fuck toy? Ino suggested. Ino-chan. Hinata-chan protested, but at least she wasn't mortified by crudeness anymore. So mean, Ikamatsu-chan, drawled Yoshi, smirking, and bumped Ino's shoulder with his. Ino was gratified to see the flash of insecurity on Shikamaru's face, before he lumbered off toward the nearest unoccupied chair. Ha! Served him right. He had fucked around with Yoshi's feelings for years, it felt good to give him a taste of his own medicine. Too busy stopping a war, I guess, Yoshi said after a moment, shattering the levity with a single somber statement. He was still smiling, but there was hardness in his eyes that Ino recognized, that she relied on. She bet many of her dreams for the future on that hardness. Shikamaru suddenly groaned and buried his face in his hand. Mold. My room. Mum's going to kill somebody. Ino cackled. Hinata-chan just placidly smiled, but she was definitely cackling on the inside. Yoshi lit up. Oh. Now I get why you had an apartment lined up. Shikamaru was wide awake and still extremely annoyed at Ino managing to get one over him by the time Yoshi dragged him up to his room. He had not been told what to expect, but he had had hopes. Those were dashed immediately. Yoshi gathered a few stray objects from the floor and deposited them all on his bed. Then he went and struck up a one-sided whispered conversation with Midori-sensei. He must have accepted the monstera's silence as an affirmative response, because he waved Shikamaru over, knelt down, and clasped the edge of the huge flower pot. Hey, dear heart? Yes? Shikamaru said, skeptically looking down at the hand that had grabbed his ankle. Yoshi grinned up at him. Don't blink. Shikamaru was sucked through a tube of vacuum. He couldn't have screamed if he tried. He couldn't have blinked if he tried, so thanks for useful advice, Blondie, really, that was great. A split second later they were in breathable air again, inside their apartment, and Midori-sensei was perfectly positioned in the corner where Yoshi had wanted her. Shikamaru opened his mouth to say several very vulgar words, but they all stuck in his throat. Oh gods! Yoshi had been so excited when he had devised a method for transporting the monstera, and he had thanked Shikamaru, and had he found the motivation to finally figure out the Hirosaki because he missed his plant? Shikamaru recalled how Yoshi had casually laid waste to an entire enemy army before he could teleport, and realized that the world would never be the same. Celebration now? Yoshi suggested, pupils blown wide with lust. Shikamaru nodded. Yuki came home from her trip with a wagon full of exotic seeds and seedlings, and sealed scrolls full of interesting intel. As always, her third question, not counting the absent why do we have 2 open cartons of mango juice in the fridge? To which Inoichi did not have a satisfactory answer, was about what had changed in her absence. Inoichi floundered. Too much was the answer that occurred to him first, but he could do better than that for his beloved wife. Of course, he would tell her everything. He simply wished that he had that everything sorted out inside his head. Perhaps talking about it would help him make sense of the past years? I'm so glad we ended the wars so fast, she said, holding on to Inoichi as though she had been afraid for him. He understood too well. There was a reason why he had told her to lie low and not try crossing either Earth or Wind Country to get home, even if it meant she had been away 3 times as long as she had originally planned. Inoichi himself had barely gone anywhere near the fighting, and that was mostly to act as Jiraiya-sama's assistant for a couple of weeks when they were extracting strategic intelligence from captured grass shinobi, since transporting so many prisoners all the way to Konoha had been unfeasible. That had left him in the position of sending one of his children to warn the other that he had been sent into a trap. The children were the ones who fought for real. Yoshi has been promoted, Inoichi reported. That one was easy enough. He's a jounin now. And Tsunade-sama unofficially conscripted him for some high-level administrative duties. Yuki lit up with excitement. Where is he? This one was less easy. He's moved out. Mostly. The other day Inoichi had gone to check on Midori-sensei, and the monstera was not there. How had Yoshi moved it out without anyone noticing? The plant was half the size of a room by now. Moved out, Yuki repeated, somewhat dismayed. Oh well. We'll have to have a family dinner, then. You pick the restaurant and I'll ask Mayu for reservations when I have a chat with the girls. A shiver ran down Inoichi's spine. His beloved wife raised her eyebrows at Inoichi. I gave him the clan talk. Inoichi protested. Yuki gestured toward the boys, as if he hadn't noticed them sit there all aglow and engaged. I think you overemphasize the potential problems of teenage pregnancy, and underemphasize the problems of whirlwind marriage. At least they had not eloped. The boys shared a look like they thought elopement was an excellent idea. Fortunately, Ino would never stand for it, and Inoichi trusted in his princess powers of persuasion. Inoichi had initially wanted to sit the boys down and talk at them until they realized how hasty they were being, and that they would change their minds, but Yoshi wasn't Inoichi, and Shikamaru wasn't Hisashi. Shikamaru was just like Yoshino, more obstinate than a mule. Once he set his mind on something, the only one that could talk him out of it was, well, Yoshi. And Yoshi seemed perfectly happy to go along with this craziness. Inoichi shook his head and mentally pushed the staff to hurry up with their food. I was so sure the likelihood of those 2 events would be reversed. Ino was somehow managing to keep her face straight. Or, and this option was a lot more likely, she was hiding her fit of hilarity under a genjutsu. Yuki sighed and let the annoyance go so she could properly enjoy the full comedy value of the situation. Think of the silver lining, dear. There is one? There are several dash. Yes, Inoichi could admit that he found no fault whatsoever with Yoshi's choice of partner. They knew Shikamaru well, and the young man was a good Konoha shinobi with an excellent potential. And a good enough man too, which was admittedly rarer. Not to mention that Inoichi had once sat that brat down and intimidated him into never ever even considering intentionally harming one of his children. But, chiefly, the boys are saving another generation from a decade's worth of Saturday suffering. For all that the previous generation of Inoshikacho had instated the conditioning day to save their children's lives, their wives would never, ever let them live it down. And Yuki was wrong, because there would be plenty of other Nara even if Shikamaru did not father a child. But this was absolutely not the time to point it out. Besides, Yuki planted one calloused hand on top of the tablecloth, leaned closer to Inoichi and whispered into his ear, "It's not as though we girls haven't seen it coming. Yoshino predicted this exact outcome almost 13 years ago. When Shikamaru makes Yoshi Hokage, the point will be moot anyway," Ino quipped over the end of her mother's sentence. "Hokage?" Yuki repeated, surprised. "I think it's fairly obvious. In hindsight, Shikamaru does not want the hassle, but he likes the challenge of it. He will be a great gray eminence," and this time it was Inoichi who leaned closer to his wife and whispered, "It's in Yoshi's blood, isn't it?" Yuki nodded. "I haven't thought of it that way. But I can see it." Then, blessedly, the waitresses appeared with their first course, so Inoichi was temporarily off the hook. Yoshi's body flickered into the training ground and smiled when he saw Shikamaru dozing in the afternoon sun. Choji waved at him. "Hey, dear heart." Yoshi called out, skipping over, and then leaned down to kiss the top of Shikamaru's head. Shikamaru jumped like a scalded cat and fell into a defensive crouch 3 yards away. He shuddered. "Don't ever do that again, Ino." "Seconded," said a second Yoshi, hopping down from a tree. Choji's eyes flickered between them, and he finally figured out what had happened. This was even creepier than Ino's usual jokes. Thirded. Ino cancelled her Yoshi henge. She was also shuddering. "I didn't want to, but Mum asked me to, and if I didn't do it dash. Then Mum would have done it herself," Yoshi filled in, wide-eyed, and gulped. "And Shikamaru would have failed the test." Ino nodded with a grim set to her mouth. "You're welcome." Shikamaru took a deep breath. Choji could tell that he was fighting with himself over something, but Shika was a lightning-fast thinker even though he made it look like he wasn't, so he quickly came to a conclusion. He stood up straight, looked Ino in the eye and said, "Thanks." Ino replied by miming the universal "I'm watching you." Choji and Yoshi just grinned at one another, happy that their friends were finally at least sort of getting along. Yoshi had been trying to steer the conversation somewhere for a while now, and though Sakura was content to play along and discuss village policies, Sasuke had about reached his saturation point. But supervision of the office, or its limitation by laws, would make it too inflexible. It would be eaten by bureaucracy dash. "What is the point of hoarding all that power?" Sasuke cut her off. "If the Hokage then turns around and tasks his council with the actual hands-on problem solving. Which, going by past experience, translates into them running black ops against our own people. That should derail the conversation completely." Sasuke tried not to overuse his personal technique of reductio ad itachi, because it was about the only weapon that worked against Yoshi, and he did not want it to lose its impact. "The Hokage should be better than that," Yoshi said, which despite the wording was an agreement. Sasuke put him out of his misery and asked him the question he wanted to be asked, "How about you?" Maybe now they could move on to a less infuriating subject. "What?" Sasuke rolled his eyes. As if he would fall for that. "You'd be better than that if you were Hokage. With your Yamanaka stuff, you might not be half bad at it." This was torture. And bitch Sakura better stop laughing at him in the next 2 seconds, or he would give her something to cry about. "You really think I could do it?" asked the greatest confidence man of their generation. "HN." Sakura snorted. "And Sasuke and I will be there to punch your face in if you even think about ordering the slaughter of a whole clan." "Good." Yoshi grinned, finally satisfied, and it only took an hour of utter despair. "If I try shit like that, just have me assassinated in the twilight, yeah?" Sasuke smiled. It will be my pleasure. X. That's your plotting face. I don't have a specific plotting face, Shikamaru protested, turning away from the window. That's true, Yoshi agreed solemnly. All your faces are plotting faces. I only have one face, Blondie. You should know that, since you've got exclusive rights to it. You win in semantics. And in plotting dash. Debatable, if you are the competition dash. That's a moot point, 'cause we share all the plots now. No more your plots or my plots. There's only our plots. Then you should tell me about the Hokage plot. You already know about the Hokage plot. Granted, Shikamaru did know about it, but not because he had been told of it. He had had to put it together on his own. Then you know I'm plotting your plot, which is now our plot, and that should give me equal plotting rights dash. Yoshi broke into giggles, which he tried to muffle in Shikamaru's chest. Shikamaru held him closer, set his chin on top of that blonde head and wondered what the hell had happened to him. He hadn't known he even possessed the capacity for ridiculousness, but here he was, acting like a lunatic. Worse, a talkative lunatic. Troublesome. That answers the question I was going to ask you, Yoshi said, pulling away far enough that they could have an actual conversation. You think I can do it? And, be good at it? Shikamaru rolled his eyes. There was no one in this village that could be better at it. You'll surpass even your father. Yoshi blinked in bemusement. But Dad. Wait. He turned his head to look out of the window, and although they could only see the very top of the Hokage mountain, it was clear what he was searching for. Oh. I didn't know that you didn't know, Shikamaru said. He was not sorry. I would have told you sooner. The kunai, Yoshi whispered, awed. The Hirosaki. Shikamaru shrugged. I told you. The perfect gift. And I loved it, but now I feel like I didn't love it enough. Dad? His son didn't even live here, and this still happened. Inoichi couldn't have suppressed his smile if he had tried. Did you know that I am the Yondaime Hokage's son? Wow, that smile had fallen off his face fast. How did you find out? He wanted to ask. At the same time he was glad that the wait was over. He could finally talk about it. He could tell Naruto, all that he remembered about his blood family. It wasn't much, but he had been hoarding the memories like a treasure, so that there was at least a little bit of Naruto's legacy waiting for him down the line. Minato-san's, yes. And Uzumaki Kushina-san's. Inoichi beckoned his son to take a seat. He broke out the bottle Yuki had brought for him. He had never before drunk alcohol with either of his children, but this felt like a good time to break that seal. Before you ask, all who knew or suspected had been forbidden from speaking about it by the order of Sandaime-sama. The dispensation we got for telling you about the... He had been about to say you know what, as he had done for so long for fear that someone might overhear, but he was not afraid now. What could those eavesdroppers do? Yoshi was stronger than his enemies, and even if he faltered, he had a circle of friends that were nearly as strong individually. Altogether the group was nigh on unstoppable. The dispensation for telling you about the Kyuubi did not cover the identity of your parents. Yoshi sipped expensive booze from a place neither of them had ever heard of and contemplated. After a while he tugged on his ponytail. If I stopped dyeing my hair, it would be kinda like his, right? Yes. Inoichi remembered the 4-year-old with a head of bright yellow. Like a dandelion. Just like his. Dunno. Yoshi shrugged and smiled. Maybe one day. Ino and I still have way too much fun with the twin act. Even though she's a couple of inches taller than me even without wearing heels. Neither of your parents were tall, Inoichi said sympathetically. He hoped that, wherever those two were, they were at least as insanely proud of this amazing kid as he was, and that they would be okay with how Inoichi had done by him. Go on, Dad, Yoshi bade him. You've got to have some stories. Dish. Inoichi thought about the first time Kushina-san had publicly rejected Minato-san's proposal. He had been there. And managed not to laugh. Too much. He started talking, and it was only his training that kept his eyes from welling with the relief he felt. Yoshi wasn't angry. Yoshi understood. Yoshi wasn't leaving, and most importantly, Yoshi still considered himself Inoichi's son. I want to tell you my real name, Yoshi said out of blue. Ino looked him up and down. He had just returned from a mission, obviously, and although he didn't seem wounded now, there were enough holes in his uniform to prove that he had been wounded. Only then she registered what he had said. That was why he had mysteriously appeared inside Greenhouse 3 while she was cutting daffodils? Wait, like before you were adopted. You said you didn't remember. Yoshi solemnly nodded. As long as Dad's order was standing, I didn't remember a thing. I remember now though. That was actually an acceptable excuse. Ino set her shears down to minimize the risk of unintentional maiming and stood straight. What was your name? And Yoshi told her genealogical information so crazy she couldn't believe it, for all of 3 seconds, because then it was suddenly so stupidly obvious, she couldn't believe she hadn't figured it out herself. She punched him, but at least nobody was stabbed. Shikamaru had been under the impression that watching fireworks was supposed to be romantic. Certainly Aburame and Haraguchi seemed to act like it was. He realized quickly that between Ino and Sasuke both sides of Yoshi were claimed, and he would have to make do with standing behind him. He did not mind too much. Yoshi wore geta, so his shoulder was at about the right height for Shikamaru to rest his chin on without having to straighten up. I spent so long resenting the memory, Sasuke said quietly, barely audible over the explosions. His face betrayed nothing, but no one stared at fireworks with quite that much intensity without emotion driving them. Yoshi made an understanding sound. Maybe try and remember him this way? Suggested Sakura. Sasuke nodded. And there was probably a reason for Sasuke and Yoshi holding hands. Seeing as Sasuke was holding Sakura's hand on the other side, Shikamaru expected that it was another plague thing, and didn't remark on it, even as his mind catalogued the hints, so he could put the puzzle together later. Is this weird? Shikamaru asked once the fireworks were over. Sasuke had pulled away to be dour and unapproachable, Ino was preoccupied, Sakura and Hinata had snuck away to meet Lee. Given the context of the celebration? His arms were wound around Yoshi's waist, so his stomach, and the seal on it, was right there for Shikamaru to pat. Yoshi shrugged. It used to be, a bit, after Mom and Dad told me. But it's not anymore, not really, 'cause it's about people celebrating survival and remembering one of their heroes. He paused, and then slumped into Shikamaru's hold, which wasn't a good idea, since Shikamaru had already been slumped onto him, and now they had nobody to hold them up. This was why Chuji was the designated Yamanaka catcher between them. Shikamaru didn't have the right sort of reflexes. Speaking literally, of course, when it came to metaphorical Yamanaka catching, that was provably Shikamaru's domain. Shikamaru did manage to keep them upright, because he was a jounin, and falling on their arses would have been too embarrassing. It is weird now, Yoshi muttered. He stared over at the Hokage mountain. Namikaze Minato, huh? Sakura and Sasuke were in the middle of the inventory, having turned Sasuke's living room into an exhibition of weapons and tags, when the door opened and spat out a Yamanaka. And then spat out another. Followed by a Nara. HN? Inquired Sasuke. This was still his house, and he didn't recall inviting anyone other than his team. Yoshi clapped. I had the most brilliant idea for a plan. Like, the best. The most epic. The cruelest, most underhanded thing you can imagine. Sit down and have some more sugar, snapped Ino, kicking the feet from under her brother. Yoshi, of course, hopped right over the kick, but he ended up in one of the few armchairs that weren't loaded with sharp things. He accepted a pocky stick from his sister and obediently stuck it into his mouth, all the while grinning obnoxiously. I solemnly promise that all my plots are Shikamaru's plots, too, Yoshi explained, tugging his +1 down into his lap. His eyes met Sasuke's, and somehow, he managed to convey that this was the one and only chance Sasuke would have to protest, and also that Yoshi would accept the exclusion of his family from Sasuke's revenge plan. But Sasuke had already promised to support Yoshi as his future Hokage, and not trusting him now would be akin to rescinding that. Sasuke held his peace. It was not as though these were random people brought in. Ino was one of Yoshi's most fanatical followers, sometimes it seemed like they shared a brain too, and Shikamaru was basically just an extension of Yoshi's will at this point. And this really fucking awesome plan of yours somehow needs Ino? Asked violent Sakura. Sasuke considered inching away from her, but eventually decided that if she did try to molest him, he might as well enjoy himself. He didn't really think she would. After years spent in close proximity to him, she was good at suppressing her baser instincts even when the personality in charge was more or less an amalgam of baser instincts. He tried not to think about it, but the fact remained that if he wanted to restore his clan, he would have to deal with a female all up in his case. And why invite another one if there was already one there? Sasuke doubted he would ever learn to tolerate someone better than he tolerated Sakura. Yup. Yoshi confirmed cheerfully. I consulted with Ino, cause I always do that when I need help mind-fucking people, and then I asked Kurama about what scared Madara. Kurama? Sasuke, Sakura and Ino asked in unison, equally confused and equally ignored. And we can trust Kurama on this, cause I don't think there's actually anybody else in the world whom Kurama hates as much as that guy, and so he recounted all the people that Madara was at least worried about, which was a short list, cause that guy didn't even take the Shodai all that seriously. Fair enough, the Shodai was sort of a wet tissue sometimes. Naidame-sama thought so too. Had a whole chapter about it in his dash. Breathe, Ino said about a second before Sasuke would have done so himself. Bitch Sakura simply pouted, denied her entertainment of seeing a teammate faint from self-inflicted lack of oxygen. You mean Uchiha Madara? Shikamaru put his face in his hands and groaned. And anyway, Yoshi blithely continued, we found the perfect way of psyching out the bastard. I need Ino to dye my hair red, and then help me put it into buns like Tenten wears. I've got these Kanzashi dash. Sakura burst into wild laughter, apparently having figured out where Yoshi was going with this. With seals, which probably don't match entirely, but should be a good enough facsimile. Anyway, how much do you guys know about Uzumaki Nido? Sasuke found himself uncontrollably laughing right alongside Sakura. His team leader frightened him occasionally, but this was the actual reason why Sasuke had no qualms about following the madman to the end of the world and beyond. Yoshi! Are you seeing what I am seeing? Ino barreled into his side, clung like a limpet, and stared across the mission's desk room at the unfamiliar dark-haired, bare-bellied ninja about their age. Naruto had been watching the train wreck in utter fascination for a few minutes. He was in no hurry, he just wanted to see if there were any missions they could misuse as cover-up for their hunt on Madara. Either this boy was the single best actor whom Naruto had ever met, leagues better than even Ino, or his emotional intelligence was in the negatives. He's so fucking messed up, Ino breathed, stars in her eyes. And that is how my existence came to be declassified, Scarface, said the stranger, and then was genuinely surprised when Ami punched him in the crotch. Fuyumi very slowly, with a loud metallic sound, slid her kodachi back into its sheath. The stranger stood straight, as if the probably debilitating amount of pain didn't even register for him. He did something with his expression that could be theoretically called a smile, all the right muscles were activated, but which had obviously been learnt by a face that had no clue what to do without extensive and detailed instruction. He pulled out a book. Casual violence can sometimes be a sign of friendship, he read, and turned the not smile at Team Shibi. Thank you. We are going to be excellent friends. Since the altercation had drawn a lot of attention, a sudden horrified hush fell over the mission's desk room upon this proclamation. The chunin behind the desks paused in their respective activities. Let me guess, Naruto muttered. He's dash. Hot. Ino finished for him, and then her grin widened. I'm going to go say hi. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.